What this story will give you. Most people believe they have a bad memory. They think forgetting names, words, lessons, and English vocabulary means they are weak, slow, or not intelligent enough. That belief is wrong. This story will show you something powerful. Your memory is not broken. Your method is. Through Ethan's journey, you will discover how memory actually works, why traditional learning fails, and how simple changes in thinking can completely transform your ability to remember. Not only information, but English words, sentences, ideas, and confidence. By following this story, you will learn why forgetting happens even when you study hard, how emotion controls memory more than repetition, how to turn forgetting into a learning signal, how to remember English vocabulary naturally, how to train your brain to store information long-term, how to stop blaming yourself and start using the right system. This is not a textbook. This is not theory. This is a mental reset. If you finish this story, you will never say, "I forget easily" again. You will say, "I finally know how memory really works." Ethan used to forget everything. Names disappeared minutes after introductions. English words vanished the moment he closed the book. Lessons felt clear at night and completely gone the next morning. He thought something was wrong with his brain. One day, after forgetting a simple English sentence he had practiced all week, Ethan slammed his notebook shut and whispered something dangerous to himself. "Maybe I'm just not smart enough." That sentence hurt more than forgetting. Because once you believe your memory is weak, you stop trying differently. You repeat harder, you push longer, and you fail again. What Ethan didn't know was this. People with great memory don't remember more. They store differently. They don't fight forgetting. They use it. They don't memorize. They connect. The real reason you forget English, lessons, names, and ideas is not laziness, age, or intelligence. It's this one mistake most people make every day. They try to remember without meaning. And the brain rejects meaningless information. The moment Ethan discovered this truth, everything changed. English words started sticking. Sentences stayed. Ideas returned when needed. Confidence replaced frustration. This is not magic. This is not talent. This is method. And once you learn it, forgetting stops being your enemy and becomes your teacher. Chapter 1: Your memory is not broken. Ethan always believed memory was something you were born with, like height or eye color. Either you had it or you didn't. Growing up, he watched classmates remember lessons easily while he struggled to recall even the simplest details. Teachers told him to revise more. Friends joked that he was forgetful. Slowly, without realizing it, Ethan accepted a silent identity, the one with bad memory. And once that belief settled inside him, it began controlling everything. How he studied, how he learned English, how confident he felt when speaking, and how quickly he gave up when things became difficult. Every time he forgot a word, his mind didn't say "learn better." It said, "See? You can't remember." What Ethan didn't understand was that forgetting is not failure. Forgetting is feedback. The brain forgets things for a reason, not because it is weak, but because it is selective. The human brain is designed to protect energy, not waste it. It remembers what feels important, emotional, useful, or repeated with purpose. Everything else gets erased. But Ethan was never taught this. So he tried to force memory through repetition without connection. He read English words again and again, wrote them 10 times, highlighted sentences, and still forgot them days later. This wasn't because his memory was broken. It was because his brain didn't see value in what he was feeding it. One evening, exhausted and frustrated, Ethan searched online for answers and came across a sentence that stopped him cold. Memory is not storage. Memory is meaning. He reread it slowly. Something inside him shifted. For the first time, he questioned his belief. What if forgetting wasn't proof of weakness? What if it was proof that he was using the wrong method? That night, Ethan stopped blaming his brain and started observing it. He noticed that he never forgot emotional moments, arguments, embarrassing situations, powerful movies, songs that touched him. Yet he forgot English words he studied hours ago. The difference was obvious. Emotion, connection, and relevance. This realization hit him hard. He understood that his brain was not refusing to remember, it was refusing to care. And suddenly everything made sense. English vocabulary had no story. Lessons had no purpose. Words were just symbols on a page, disconnected from life. His brain did exactly what it was designed to do: discard them. That night marked the beginning of a new journey. Ethan decided he would stop memorizing and start experiencing information. He would stop forcing memory and start building meaning. As he closed his notebook, something new replaced frustration: hope. Real hope. Not the fake motivation that fades overnight, but the calm confidence that comes from understanding the real problem. Ethan whispered to himself, "My memory isn't bad. My method was." And for the first time in years, forgetting no longer scared him, pointed him forward. Chapter 2: Why Forgetting is Actually a Signal. For a long time, Noah believed forgetting was proof of weakness. Every time a word disappeared from his mind, every time a name slipped away, every time he failed to recall what he studied just yesterday, he felt a quiet shame settle inside him. He would close his notebook slowly, stare at the page, and think, "Why is my memory so bad?" He compared himself to others: friends who remembered everything, people who spoke confidently, learners who seemed to absorb information without effort. In those moments, forgetting felt like failure, like a sign that something inside his brain was broken. But the truth was very different. The day Noah began to understand forgetting, everything changed. It started on an ordinary afternoon. Noah was reviewing English words he had studied all week. The list was familiar. He had written the words carefully, repeated them aloud, even used them in sentences. Yet when he tried to recall them without looking, his mind went blank. Frustration rose in his chest. His hands tightened around the pen. He almost closed the book and gave up, just like he had done so many times before. But instead of quitting, he paused. He took a deep breath, and a thought appeared in his mind. What if forgetting is not the enemy? What if it's a message? That question marked the beginning of a new understanding. Your brain is not a storage box. It is not designed to keep everything forever. Your brain is a living system, constantly deciding what matters and what does not. Every single day, your mind receives thousands of pieces of information. Sounds, words, images, emotions, experiences. If your brain tried to remember everything, it would collapse. So it filters, it deletes, it forgets. Not because it is weak, but because it is intelligent. Forgetting is not a bug. It is a feature. Noah didn't know this before. Like most people, he believed memory worked like a camera. See something once and it should stay forever. But memory doesn't work that way. Memory works through signals. When you forget something, your brain is not saying, "You're bad at learning." It is saying, "This information has not been marked as important yet." This realization hit Noah deeply. Think about it. You remember your name effortlessly. You remember your childhood home. You remember painful moments and joyful moments clearly. Why? Because those memories are connected to emotion, repetition, and meaning. Your brain keeps what feels important to your survival, identity, or future. Everything else must earn its place. So when Noah forgot English words, it wasn't because his memory was weak. It was because his brain didn't see those words as essential yet. They were just symbols on paper, disconnected from real life, emotion, and urgency. This was the signal he had been missing. Forgetting is your brain asking for a better method. Modern brain science explains this clearly. Memory has 3 stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Most learners fail at the first stage, encoding. They read passively, highlight pages, copy notes, and assume learning is happening. But passive input sends a weak signal to the brain. The brain responds by saying, "This doesn't seem important. I'll forget it." Noah realized he had been studying English like background noise, reading lists, watching videos without engagement, listening without pressure. His brain never received a strong reason to remember. Then he learned something even more powerful. Forgetting is part of learning. Every time you forget and then try to remember, your brain strengthens the memory. This process is called retrieval practice. When you struggle to recall a word, your brain is forced to rebuild the pathway. And each rebuild makes the pathway stronger. This is why memories formed through effort last longer than memories formed through ease. Noah thought back to moments in his life he could never forget. Times he failed publicly, moments of embarrassment, situations where he had to explain himself under pressure. Those memories were sharp and clear, not because he wanted them, but because his brain marked them as important. They were tied to emotion and consequence. And then he understood something shocking. If pain and pressure can create strong memories, then intentional challenge can do the same without the pain. From that day on, Noah stopped treating forgetting as a personal weakness. He started treating it as feedback. Every time he forgot a word, he asked himself a new question. Why didn't my brain keep this? Was it because he never used it? Because it had no emotional connection? Because he never struggled to retrieve it? This mindset shift changed everything. Instead of rereading, he started testing himself. Instead of copying notes, he started closing the book and recalling from memory. Instead of studying silently, he started speaking aloud, forcing his brain to retrieve words under pressure. Each time he failed, he didn't feel shame. He felt information. The failure told him exactly what needed reinforcement. He also learned that forgetting is temporary, not permanent. When a memory fades, it doesn't disappear completely. It becomes harder to access, like a path in the forest that grows over when you stop walking on it. The path is still there. You just need to walk it again. And every time you do, it becomes clearer. This is why cramming fails. It creates temporary familiarity, not long-term memory. Your brain feels like it knows something, but it hasn't built strong pathways. The signal is weak. Once the pressure is gone, the memory fades. But when learning is spaced, active, and slightly uncomfortable, the signal becomes strong. Noah began to see forgetting as a friend, an honest one. Forgetting showed him what mattered and what didn't. It showed him where to focus. It guided his practice. Instead of avoiding difficult words, he leaned into them. Instead of repeating what was easy, he attacked what was hard. And slowly, something changed. Words started coming back faster. Not because he memorized more, but because his brain learned how to remember. He noticed that when he struggled first, the memory lasted longer. When he forced recall, understanding deepened. When he connected words to stories, emotions, and real situations, they stayed. For the first time, Noah felt in control of his learning. He realized that people who remember everything are not born different. They simply use better signals. They challenge their memory instead of protecting it. They allow forgetting to happen, and then use it to build stronger recall. Forgetting was never the problem. It was the message. And once Noah learned to listen to that message, his memory stopped being a mystery and started becoming a skill. In the next chapter, you will discover how attention and emotion decide what your brain remembers, and how to use this power to remember anything, including English, faster and deeper than ever before. Chapter 3. Your brain was never designed to remember everything. Ethan used to believe there was something wrong with him. Every time he forgot a word, a name, a lesson, or a sentence he had studied the night before, a quiet shame crept into his chest. He would sit there, staring at his notebook, wondering how the information could disappear so easily. "I studied this," he would whisper. "Why can't I remember?" The more he asked that question, the heavier it became, until forgetting felt like proof of failure. But what Ethan didn't know, what no teacher had ever explained to him, was a simple, life-changing truth. The human brain was never designed to remember everything. It was designed to filter, prioritize, and forget. Forgetting wasn't a weakness. It was a feature. One night, after another frustrating study session, Ethan stumbled across an old neuroscience lecture online. He didn't expect much, but one sentence stopped him completely. If the brain remembered everything, it would collapse under its own weight. That sentence echoed in his mind. Collapse? Wait. He paused the video and leaned back, suddenly realizing something terrifying and comforting at the same time. Every day, his brain received millions of pieces of information. Sounds, images, emotions, words, faces, thoughts. If it tried to store all of it permanently, his mind would be chaos. No focus, no clarity, no decision-making. Forgetting, he realized, was not the enemy of intelligence. It was the protector of intelligence. The brain is not a storage box. It is a survival machine. Its primary job is not to help you pass exams or speak perfect English. Its job is to keep you alive. That means it constantly asks one question. Is this information important for survival or future use? If the answer is no, the brain lets it fade. This is why Ethan could remember embarrassing moments from 10 years ago but forget vocabulary he studied yesterday. Emotional intensity signals importance. Repetition signals importance. Use signals importance. But passive reading, passive listening, highlighting pages without action, to the brain that feels like noise. Ethan began to see his past learning mistakes clearly. He had been treating his brain like a camera, expecting it to record everything automatically. But the brain doesn't work like a camera. It works like a spotlight. It shines only on what matters. Everything else stays in the dark. And here was the painful truth. Most of the things Ethan tried to memorize never felt meaningful to his brain. They were abstract, disconnected, emotionless. He studied words without stories, rules without context, information without purpose. So his brain did exactly what it was designed to do. It let them go. As this realization sank in, something inside Ethan softened. He wasn't broken. His memory wasn't weak. He had simply been fighting biology instead of working with it. Modern education teaches people to blame themselves for forgetting, but it rarely teaches how memory actually works. The brain remembers best when information is tied to emotion, movement, repetition, and meaning. Without those elements, memory has no reason to stay. Forgetting is the brain saying, "This is not relevant yet." This changed the way Ethan saw English learning completely. He realized why he could remember lyrics from songs he loved but forget grammar rules. Why movie quotes stuck in his mind effortlessly while word lists vanished overnight. The difference wasn't intelligence. It was engagement. Songs made him feel something. Stories created images. Conversations demanded response. His brain woke up during those moments. But textbooks, silent memorization, endless lists, his brain fell asleep. He remembered a time when he learned a single English sentence during a real conversation. Someone had asked him, "What do you do for a living?" His heart raced. His mind scrambled. He replied slowly, imperfectly, but he replied. That sentence never left him. Not because it was grammatically complex, but because it mattered. It was connected to his identity, his fear, his voice. That one moment taught him more than 10 pages of notes ever had. The brain remembers what is used, not what is seen. This is why forgetting feels so unfair. You did study, you did read, you did listen, but your brain didn't see a reason to keep the information alive. Memory is not about effort alone. It is about signals. And the strongest signal of all is action. Ethan began to understand another painful truth. Schools reward short-term memory, not real memory. Cramming works for exams because the brain temporarily holds information under pressure. But once the pressure disappears, so does the memory. The brain asks again, "Is this still important?" And if the answer is no, it deletes it. This is why people forget most of what they studied after exams. Not because they are lazy, but because their brain is efficient. As Ethan reflected on this, a strange sense of relief washed over him. He had spent years angry at himself for forgetting. But now he felt something new, curiosity. If forgetting was natural, then remembering must be something you engineer, not something you beg for. Memory was not a gift you were born with. It was a skill you could design. He looked at his English notebook again, but this time with different eyes. Instead of asking, "How do I memorize this?" he asked, "How do I make this matter to my brain?" That single shift changed everything. He stopped copying lists and started creating connections. He stopped rereading and started speaking. He stopped highlighting and started using. Slowly, his memory stopped leaking. Not because he forced it, but because his brain finally understood why the information was valuable. For the first time, Ethan forgave himself for forgetting. And in that forgiveness, his mind became open again. Forgetting was no longer a sign of failure. It was a message, a signal, a teacher. It was telling him, change your method, not your worth. And this was only the beginning. Because once you understand that your brain was never designed to remember everything, you are finally ready to learn the real secret, how to make your brain choose to remember what matters most. Chapter 4, The Illusion of Repetition, Why Reading Again and Again Fails You. Ethan used to believe that repetition was the key to memory. If he read something once and forgot it, he would read it again. If he forgot it again, he would read it a third time. He believed that more exposure meant stronger memory, and for years he blamed himself when it didn't work. Sitting at his desk late at night, English notebook open, pages filled with underlines, highlights, and rewritten sentences, he felt tired but not smarter. The words looked familiar, almost friendly, yet when someone asked him a simple question in English the next day, his mind went blank. That was the most painful part. Not that he didn't recognize the words, but that he couldn't use them. He could see them on the page in his head, but they wouldn't come out when he needed them. That night, frustration turned into quiet anger. I study so much, he whispered. So why can't I remember? What Ethan didn't know yet was that his problem wasn't laziness or intelligence. It was an illusion that repetition equals memory. The brain is very good at tricking you. When you read the same thing again and again, your brain becomes familiar with it, and familiarity feels like knowing. This is the trap. Familiarity creates comfort, and comfort creates the false belief that learning has happened. But real memory doesn't live in comfort. It lives in effort. Ethan realized this during a conversation with his mentor, who asked him a simple question. If repetition worked, why do students forget after exams? The question hit him deeply. He remembered how he used to memorize answers perfectly the night before a test, only to forget everything weeks later. The information never became part of him. Passed through him temporarily, like water through open hands. The mentor explained that the brain does not store information because it sees it often. It stores information because it needs it. Memory is not built by repetition alone. It is built by retrieval, struggle, and use. Ethan began to understand something shocking. Every time he reread a page without testing himself, his brain stayed passive. Passive brains don't remember. They observe, they recognize, they nod, but they don't build strong neural connections. The brain strengthens memory only when it is forced to pull information out, not when information is pushed in. This is why reading feels productive but fails in real life. Feels safe. Feels easy. Feels smooth. But smooth learning is weak learning. The brain learns best when it struggles slightly, when it hesitates, searches, and almost fails. That struggle sends a signal to the brain. This is important. Keep this. Ethan tested this truth painfully. He closed his book and tried to explain out loud what he had just read. His mind stalled. His sentences broke. He felt embarrassed even though he was alone. But something interesting happened after that struggle. When he reopened the book, the words felt sharper, clearer, more alive. The effort had changed the way his brain processed them. That night, Ethan understood that forgetting wasn't always a failure. Sometimes, forgetting was a message saying, you didn't challenge your memory enough. He remembered how he used to highlight everything in bright colors, believing that color meant importance. But the brain doesn't care about colors. It cares about meaning and usage. Highlighting felt like work, but it required no thinking. It gave him the illusion of progress without the pain of effort. Real memory always demands a small price. Discomfort. When Ethan began closing his notebook and forcing himself to recall words, ideas, and sentences without looking, learning suddenly became harder, but deeper. He failed often. He forgot often. But each failure strengthened something inside his mind. Each moment of, I can't remember, was followed by a stronger, oh, now I get it. The biggest emotional shift came when Ethan stopped being afraid of forgetting. Before, forgetting felt like proof that he was bad at English. Now, forgetting became a tool. When he forgot something, he didn't panic. He asked himself, how can I pull this out of my brain instead of pushing it back in? He started speaking summaries out loud. He wrote from memory before checking notes. He explained ideas as if teaching someone else. These actions were uncomfortable, sometimes frustrating, but incredibly powerful. They forced his brain to build stronger pathways. Words stopped being flat symbols on a page and started becoming usable tools. Ethan also realized why repetition alone failed him emotionally. Repetition made him dependent on notes, books, and apps. He never trusted his own mind. But retrieval built confidence. Every time he remembered something without looking, even imperfectly, he felt stronger. He began to trust his memory again. And with trust came speed. With speed came clarity. With clarity came confidence. His English didn't improve overnight, but something more important did. His relationship with learning changed. He stopped chasing comfort and started chasing growth. By the end of this chapter in his journey, Ethan had learned a hard but freeing truth. Memory is not about how many times you see something. It's about how deeply you interact with it. Reading again and again is like watching someone exercise and expecting to get stronger. Only when you lift the weight yourself does your muscle grow. Memory works the same way. And from that day on, Ethan stopped rereading his way into frustration and started recalling his way into mastery. This was the moment he stopped being a passive learner and became an active one. Chapter 5. The Power of Emotional Memory. Why feelings decide what you remember. By the time Ethan reached this stage of his journey, he finally understood something that changed the way he looked at his own memory. Forgetting was never random. His brain was not broken. His mind was not weak. The real problem was much deeper and much more human. The brain does not remember information because it is important. It remembers information because it is emotional. This realization came to Ethan one quiet evening as he sat alone, staring at an old photo on his phone. It was a picture from years ago, a simple moment, nothing special at first glance. Yet he remembered every detail around it, the smell of the air, the sound in the background, even the exact feeling in his chest at that moment. And suddenly, the truth hit him with force. His brain could remember perfectly when emotions were involved. But when it came to English vocabulary lists, grammar rules, or long explanations, his mind erased them like they never existed. The difference wasn't intelligence. The difference was emotion. The human brain evolved to survive, not to pass exams. Long before books, classrooms, or languages like English existed, the brain had one job: protect you. That means it remembers danger, pleasure, pain, success, embarrassment, love, and fear. Neutral information, things with no emotional charge, gets treated as useless noise. Ethan realized this explained everything about his learning struggles. He could remember a moment of embarrassment from 10 years ago, but not 10 new English words from yesterday. He could recall a painful failure in perfect detail, but forget a grammar rule within minutes. His brain was not failing him. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. This was the turning point, because if emotion controls memory, then memory can be trained, not by repetition alone, but by emotional engagement. Ethan remembered how he used to study English, silently reading, underlining words, memorizing definitions without feeling anything. No excitement, no fear, no connection, just empty repetition. And the brain, bored and uninterested, threw it all away. But now he saw the hidden rule of memory. What you feel, you remember. What you feel nothing about, you forget. That night, Ethan decided to experiment. He opened his notebook and chose just 5 English words. Not 50, not 20, 5. But this time, he didn't write definitions. Instead, he attached emotions. For one word, he wrote a sentence about a painful mistake he once made. For another, he connected it to a dream he was chasing. For another, he created a short story where the word appeared in a moment of fear, pressure, or victory. As he wrote, he noticed something strange happening inside his body. His heart rate changed slightly. His focus sharpened. His mind felt alert, almost awake. This was not studying. This was experiencing. Neuroscience explains this clearly. Emotion activates the amygdala, a part of the brain that works closely with the hippocampus, the center of memory formation. When emotion is present, the brain receives a signal. This matters. Save this. Without emotion, the brain assumes the information is disposable. This is why people remember traumatic events clearly, why joyful moments stay vivid for years, and why boring lectures disappear instantly. Memory is not logical. Memory is emotional. Ethan began to understand why traditional learning failed him. Schools often remove emotion from learning. They focus on correctness, speed, and testing. But the brain doesn't care about tests. It cares about survival and meaning. When learning feels stressful, humiliating, or inspiring, memory locks in. When learning feels dull and mechanical, memory fades. This explained why he remembered English phrases from movies, songs, or arguments, but forgot textbook sentences. Those moments had emotional weight. As days passed, Ethan applied this rule everywhere. When learning new vocabulary, he imagined using it in a real conflict, a real conversation, or a real-life situation. He spoke words out loud with feeling, even exaggeration. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he felt uncomfortable. Sometimes he felt proud. And every time emotion appeared, memory followed. Words stopped slipping away. They stayed. Not perfectly, not forever, but long enough to be used, repeated, and reinforced. This chapter taught him something even deeper. Forgetting is not failure, it is feedback. When the brain forgets something quickly, it is saying, "You did not give me a reason to keep this." Instead of blaming himself, Ethan learned to ask a better question. How can I make this emotional? How can I connect this word to my life? How can I feel something while learning it? This single shift changed his entire relationship with memory. He also realized something uncomfortable but empowering. Pain is one of the strongest memory anchors. This explained why embarrassment during speaking practice stayed with him for years. The brain marked those moments as important because they felt dangerous. But now he flipped the script. Instead of letting pain create fear, he used mild discomfort on purpose. Speaking aloud, making mistakes, recording his voice. These moments created emotional intensity without trauma. And that intensity made learning stick. Ethan stopped chasing perfect memory. He started building meaningful memory. He didn't try to remember everything. He focused on remembering what mattered. English stopped being a subject and became a tool tied to his identity, his confidence, his future. And once emotion entered the process, remembering stopped feeling like work. It became natural. By the end of this chapter, Ethan no longer feared forgetting. He understood it. Forgetting was no longer an enemy, it was a guide. It showed him where learning was shallow and where it was deep. And for the first time, memory felt trainable, not mysterious. The brain wasn't a broken storage box. It was a living system that responded to emotion, intention, and experience. This chapter changed how Ethan learned forever. Because once you understand that emotion decides memory, you stop forcing your brain and start working with it. Chapter 6, the moment Ethan realized memory is built, not given. Ethan used to believe that memory was something you were either born with or not, like height or eye color, and for most of his life he had quietly accepted that his memory simply wasn't the good kind. He forgot names minutes after hearing them, lost vocabulary he studied the night before, and struggled to recall ideas when he needed them most. In school, teachers called it carelessness. Friends joked that he was absent-minded. But the truth was heavier than that. Every forgotten word made him feel smaller, slower, and secretly ashamed. One evening, after another frustrating English study session where familiar words seemed to disappear the moment he closed his notebook, Ethan finally stopped blaming himself and asked a different question. One that would change everything. What if forgetting isn't a weakness, but a message? That question stayed with him as he sat quietly, staring at his notes, realizing that his brain wasn't failing him. It was communicating with him, telling him something important he had never been taught how to understand. That night, Ethan began reading about how memory actually works, not the simplified version taught in school, but the real process happening inside the brain. He learned that memory is not a storage box where information is placed and kept forever. Memory is a living system. It grows, weakens, strengthens, and reshapes itself based on use. The brain doesn't remember everything. It remembers what it believes is useful, emotional, and connected. This realization hit Ethan deeply. He suddenly understood why random word lists disappeared so quickly, while embarrassing moments, emotional conversations, and powerful stories stayed vivid for years. His brain wasn't broken. It was selective. And the problem wasn't his memory, it was his method. Ethan remembered how he used to study English. Reading silently, highlighting words, repeating them once or twice, then moving on. There was no emotion, no connection, no reason for the brain to keep that information alive. The brain asked a simple question every time he studied. Why should I remember this? And Ethan had never answered it. So the brain let the information fade. Forgetting, he realized, was not failure, it was feedback. It was the brain saying, this doesn't matter yet. That idea shifted something inside him. Instead of feeling angry at himself, Ethan felt curious. If memory follows importance, then the solution wasn't to force remembering, it was to create meaning. He decided to test this new understanding immediately. Instead of memorizing a list of English words, Ethan chose just one sentence and attached it to his life. He said it out loud, imagined using it in a real conversation, pictured someone's face reacting to it, and connected it to a feeling, confidence. When he repeated the sentence later that night, it came back effortlessly. The next morning, it was still there. Not because he repeated it more times, but because his brain had decided it mattered. For the first time, Ethan felt hope, not the emotional kind, but the logical kind. The kind built on understanding how the mind truly works. As days passed, Ethan became more aware of how memory responds to attention, emotion, and usage. He noticed that when he rushed through learning, his brain rushed through forgetting. When he slowed down, focused, and engaged, memory stayed. He stopped studying like someone afraid of time running out and started studying like someone building something permanent. This shift changed not only how much he remembered, but how he felt about learning. The anxiety softened. The pressure faded. He no longer panicked when he forgot something, because forgetting was no longer a judgment, it was information. It told him what needed stronger connections. One afternoon, while practicing speaking, Ethan froze mid-sentence. A word vanished. Old fear tried to return, whispering, "See? You forgot again." But instead of stopping, he kept talking, explaining the idea using different words. Something unexpected happened. The missing word returned naturally, without effort. In that moment, Ethan understood another powerful truth. Memory strengthens through struggle, not comfort. The act of searching, adjusting, and expressing ideas under pressure created deeper neural pathways than silent repetition ever could. His brain wasn't punishing him, it was training him. Ethan began to treat memory like a muscle. Muscles don't grow when you avoid difficulty. They grow when you challenge them. Forgetting, confusion, hesitation. These weren't signs to quit. They were signs that growth was happening. This perspective transformed his relationship with English. He stopped chasing perfect recall and started chasing meaningful use. He spoke more. He made mistakes. He revisited ideas. And with every cycle, memory became stronger, faster, more reliable. Late one night, Ethan reviewed old notebooks and noticed something that shocked him. Words he once struggled to remember now felt obvious. Sentences that once felt heavy now flowed naturally. He didn't remember the exact moment improvement happened, but it had happened. Quietly, gradually, honestly. And that's when he realized the most important lesson of all. Memory doesn't improve suddenly. It accumulates. Every small, intentional interaction with the language added another layer of strength to his mind. Sitting there, Ethan smiled, not because he had mastered memory, but because he no longer feared forgetting. He finally understood the system. Forgetting wasn't the enemy. It was the teacher he had misunderstood for years. And now that he knew how to listen, how to respond, how to build instead of blame, everything felt possible. His memory wasn't weak. It was waiting for the right method. And now, Ethan was finally giving it one. Chapter 7: How Emotion Locks Memory into Your Brain. Ethan used to believe memory was a weak muscle he was born with. Some people remembered everything easily, and some people didn't. This was the story he told himself for years. But that belief quietly collapsed on a rainy evening when he realized something strange. He could remember moments from his life with perfect clarity, even after many years. Yet he couldn't remember simple English words he studied just yesterday. He could remember the exact tone of his mother's voice during an argument from childhood, the smell of rain on the day he failed an important exam, the fear in his chest the first time he tried to speak English in public and froze completely. Those memories were sharp, vivid, impossible to erase. So the question that slowly formed in his mind was simple but dangerous. If my memory is so bad, why do I remember pain so clearly? That question changed everything. Ethan began to understand a truth most people never learn. The brain does not remember information, it remembers emotion. Facts alone are weak. Repetition alone is fragile. But emotion burns memories into the nervous system like fire on stone. The brain evolved to remember what matters for survival, and survival is emotional. Fear, excitement, shame, joy, pride. These feelings tell the brain, this is important. Do not forget this. When Ethan looked back at his failed attempts to learn English, he saw the pattern clearly. He had studied words with no emotion, no urgency, no personal connection. He treated learning like a chore, not an experience. His brain did exactly what it was designed to do. It deleted what felt useless. He remembered sitting at his desk late at night, staring at vocabulary lists, repeating words in a flat, empty voice. No feeling, no story, no tension, no reason. And then he remembered another moment years ago when he tried to speak English during a meeting and everyone went silent. His face burned. His heart raced. His mind went blank. He could still remember the exact sentence he tried to say and failed to finish. That sentence stayed with him for years. Not because he studied it, but because it hurt. That was when it hit him. Emotion is the lock, memory is the door. Without emotion, the door never closes. From that day on, Ethan stopped asking, how do I memorize this? And started asking, how do I feel this? He realized that every powerful memory in his life was attached to a strong emotional state. The brain releases chemicals like dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline during emotional moments, and these chemicals strengthen neural connections. In simple words, emotion tells the brain to save the file permanently instead of deleting it overnight. This is why people remember songs from their teenage years, embarrassing moments from childhood, and painful failures from the past, but forget what they studied yesterday. The problem was never memory. The problem was emotionless learning. Ethan decided to experiment. Instead of memorizing English sentences, he started turning them into emotional experiences. He spoke sentences out loud with intensity. He acted them out. He connected words to moments in his life. When he learned a phrase about failure, he remembered his own failures. When he learned a sentence about confidence, he imagined himself speaking boldly in the future. He wasn't just reading anymore, he was reliving. At first, it felt strange, even uncomfortable. But something incredible happened. The next day, he could recall sentences effortlessly. Not perfectly, but naturally. His brain didn't resist anymore. Cooperated. One night, Ethan practiced speaking English while recording himself. He talked about his fears, his frustration, his anger at himself for wasting years believing he was bad at memory. His voice shook, his grammar broke, but his emotion was real. When he listened to the recording later, he remembered every sentence he had said. Not because it was correct, but because it was honest. That was the breakthrough. Emotion doesn't care about grammar. Emotion cares about truth. And the brain follows emotion, not rules. He finally understood why traditional studying failed him. Schools taught him to remove emotion, to be neutral, to be quiet, to avoid mistakes. But the brain learns through intensity, contrast, and feeling. When learning is safe, boring, and repetitive, the brain goes into sleep mode. When learning feels meaningful, personal, and slightly uncomfortable, the brain wakes up fully. Ethan realized that forgetting was never a sign of stupidity. It was a signal that the brain was bored. This understanding transformed how he learned English. He stopped chasing perfection and started chasing impact. Instead of asking, "Is this correct?" he asked, "Does this mean something to me?" He created mini emotional moments every time he practiced. Speaking with urgency, telling stories, arguing imaginary debates. reliving painful memories, imagining future success. He felt tired but alive. Learning no longer felt like carrying a heavy burden. It felt like releasing something trapped inside him. Slowly, his memory changed, not because his brain became stronger, but because his learning became deeper. Words stuck, sentences stayed, ideas connected, and the more emotional his practice became, the more confident his speaking felt. He wasn't just remembering English, he was owning it. Ethan stood in front of the mirror one morning and spoke a full paragraph in English about his journey. He made mistakes. He paused. But he didn't forget. His eyes filled slightly, not with sadness, but with relief. For the first time, he understood how his mind truly worked. He wasn't broken. He was just never taught the real rule of memory. What you feel, you remember. What you don't feel disappears. And in that moment, Ethan made a promise to himself. From now on, he would never learn without emotion again. He would attach feeling to knowledge, meaning to practice, and identity to language. Because memory isn't built by force. It's built by fire. And his fire had finally been lit. Chapter 8: The moment memory becomes automatic. Ethan didn't notice the change at first. That was the strange part. He expected a big moment, some dramatic realization, maybe a sudden feeling of power in his head. But instead, the shift arrived quietly, almost invisibly, like a light turning on in a room he had been living in for years without noticing the darkness. It happened on an ordinary day during an ordinary moment when he least expected it. He was walking outside, listening to an English podcast, not even trying hard, not taking notes, not forcing himself to remember anything. And yet, when the speaker used a phrase he had learned weeks ago, Ethan understood it instantly. No pause, no translation, no effort. The meaning landed in his mind as naturally as his own thoughts. He almost stopped walking. Something inside him whispered, "Wait, that used to be difficult." But now it wasn't. This was the moment when Ethan began to understand the difference between remembering and automatic memory. Before, remembering English had always felt like work. He memorized words, reviewed notes, repeated lists, and still forgot most of them under pressure. His memory felt unreliable, like a leaking bucket. But now, something deeper was happening. The information wasn't sitting on the surface of his mind anymore. It had moved inward. It had become part of him. And that scared him a little, not in a bad way, but in a powerful way, because it meant the old story he believed about himself, "I forget everything," was no longer true. Ethan started paying attention. He noticed that when he heard familiar words, his brain no longer searched for meaning. The meaning appeared first, and the word followed. This was new. Before, his brain worked like this, sound panic translation understanding. Now it worked like this, sound understanding. The difference was massive. It felt like his brain had finally stopped asking for permission to remember. It was remembering on its own. That night, Ethan sat at his desk and thought deeply about what had changed. He realized it wasn't magic. It wasn't talent. And it definitely wasn't because he suddenly had a better memory. It was because of everything he had done differently over the past chapters. He had stopped cramming. He had stopped judging himself for forgetting. He had stopped trying to force memory through pressure. Instead, he had trained his brain the way the brain actually learns, through meaning, emotion, repetition with purpose, and use. Memory had stopped being a task and had become a process. He remembered how, in the past, he would study a word once and expect it to stay forever. When it didn't, he blamed himself. Now he understood the truth. The brain doesn't keep information just because you want it to. It keeps information because it is used, felt, and needed. Ethan had started using English in small but real ways. He talked to himself. He described his day in English. He reacted emotionally to stories, not just words. He connected phrases to moments in his life. And without realizing it, he had taught his brain that English was important enough to store permanently. The next breakthrough came when Ethan tried to explain something he had learned to someone else. As he spoke, the words came out smoothly. He didn't search for them. He didn't plan. He didn't panic. The knowledge organized itself automatically as he spoke. In that moment, Ethan felt something shift in his identity. He wasn't trying to remember anymore. He knew. And knowing feels completely different. Knowing is calm. Knowing is stable. Knowing doesn't disappear under stress. Ethan realized something else too. Automatic memory only appears after patience. There is always a delay between effort and result. The brain needs time to reorganize itself. In the past, Ethan gave up too early. He quit right before the change happened. This time, he stayed. He stayed through confusion. He stayed through forgetting. He stayed through slow progress. And now, the reward was revealing itself. He thought about how this applied not just to English but to life. How many times had he said, "I'm bad at this," when the truth was simply, "I haven't trained long enough yet"? Memory, like confidence, like skill, like growth, doesn't arrive instantly. It arrives quietly after consistency. And once it arrives, it feels natural, as if it was always there. From that day on, Ethan stopped chasing memory. He stopped asking, "Will I remember this?" Instead, he asked, "How can I use this?" That single change made everything easier. When he learned a new word, he didn't write it 10 times. He used it in a sentence about his life. When he heard a new phrase, he imagined a real situation where he would say it. When he listened to English, he didn't rewind obsessively. He trusted that repetition over time would do its job. And it did. One evening, Ethan caught himself thinking in English while feeling tired, something that had never happened before. He smiled. Fatigue used to destroy his memory. Now memory stayed. That was the proof. Automatic memory doesn't collapse when you're tired. It doesn't disappear under pressure. It doesn't need effort. It simply exists. Ethan understood now. Forgetting wasn't his enemy. It was part of the training. Every time he forgot and came back, the memory grew stronger. Every time he struggled and continued, the neural connections thickened. His brain was no longer fragile. It was resilient. As he closed his notebook that night, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. He no longer feared forgetting. He no longer feared learning. He trusted his brain. He trusted the process. And most importantly, he trusted himself. Memory had stopped being something he chased, and had become something that followed him naturally. And without realizing it, Ethan had crossed another invisible line. From effort to automation. From learning to ownership. The journey wasn't over. But now, his mind was finally on his side. If you're ready, Chapter 9 will take this even deeper. From memory to mastery. Using what you remember without thinking. Chapter 9, From Memory to Mastery. Using what you remember without thinking. By the time Ethan reached this stage, something inside him had fundamentally changed, though he didn't immediately have words for it. It wasn't just that he remembered more English words now, or that sentences came to him faster. It was deeper than that. It was the strange, almost unsettling realization that he was using English without trying to remember it. One afternoon, while talking to a friend, he suddenly noticed that he had explained a whole idea in English. Clearly, calmly, naturally, and only afterward did it hit him. I didn't search for words. I didn't translate. I didn't panic. The memory had already transformed into action. This was the moment Ethan crossed an invisible line. The line between remembering and mastery. In the past, memory felt like hard work. Every new word was something to store, protect, and constantly review. Ethan used to think remembering meant holding information tightly, like gripping sand in his fist. But the harder he squeezed, the more it slipped away. Now he understood something most learners never realize. True memory is not about holding on. It's about letting go at the right time. When information is fully integrated, you stop remembering it consciously. It simply appears when needed. Just like you don't remember how to walk before taking a step, you don't remember grammar rules before speaking a sentence. The knowledge lives deeper than conscious thought. It lives in instinct. Ethan began to see that his earlier struggle came from treating memory as a test, not as a tool. He had tried to prove he remembered things instead of using them. But the brain doesn't reward proof, it rewards usage. The moment he stopped asking himself, "Do I remember this word?" and started asking, "Can I use this idea right now?" everything changed. His brain shifted modes. Instead of storage mode, it entered execution mode. And execution is where mastery is born. What surprised Ethan most was how quiet his mind had become. Before, speaking English felt noisy. Thoughts collided. Words fought for attention. Doubt shouted louder than confidence. Now there was space. When someone spoke to him, he listened fully instead of planning his reply. When he spoke, sentences formed themselves around meaning, not rules. This was not because he had learned everything, he hadn't, but because his brain had learned what mattered. Meaning first, perfection later, sometimes never, and that was okay. This was the stage where memory stopped being fragile. Earlier, forgetting felt painful, like failure. Now, forgetting felt neutral. Sometimes he forgot a word, but instead of freezing, he described it another way. Sometimes he used the wrong tense, but the message still landed. Sometimes he paused, but the pause felt natural, not embarrassing. Ethan realized that mastery doesn't mean never forgetting. It means forgetting no longer controls you. You become flexible, adaptive, free. He noticed this shift most clearly when learning new things. Before, new vocabulary felt heavy, like adding weight to an already overloaded brain. Now, new words connected instantly to experiences, emotions, and actions. He didn't memorize them, he absorbed them, because his brain had learned how to learn. It knew that information only becomes permanent when it is used in real context, spoken, felt, applied. Passive learning had trained his memory. Active usage had transformed it into mastery. One evening, Ethan reflected on how different his identity felt. He no longer thought of himself as someone learning English. That label had quietly disappeared. He now saw himself as someone who uses English. The difference may sound small, but it changed everything. Learners wait for permission. Users take action. Learners fear mistakes. Users correct themselves and move on. Learners ask, "Am I ready?" Users say, "I'll figure it out as I go." This identity shift was the real breakthrough, not vocabulary size, not fluency speed, but self-perception. Ethan understood now why so many people stay stuck for years. They collect information but never convert it. They remember, but they don't embody. They study English like it's a subject, not a skill. But skills live in the body, not just the mind. They live in repetition, rhythm, response, and reaction. Mastery is not stored in memory, it is expressed through behavior. And behavior only changes when fear loosens its grip. There was a moment that confirmed everything for Ethan. He was asked to explain his learning method to someone else. As he spoke, he heard himself using phrases, structures, and expressions he didn't remember ever studying. They were just there, alive, useful. That was when he finally understood. The goal was never to remember everything. The goal was to remember enough so that the brain could take over. To build a foundation strong enough that conscious effort could step aside. That is what mastery feels like. Effortless not because it's easy, but because the effort has already been paid. By this stage, Ethan no longer chased motivation. He relied on systems. He didn't force memory. He trusted processes. He didn't panic about forgetting. He focused on usage. And because of that, his English became something he did, not something he thought about. Memory had become invisible, and invisibility was the final proof that it worked. This chapter marked the moment Ethan stopped asking, "How do I remember more?" and started living the answer. He spoke. He listened. He reacted. He adapted. He trusted. And in that trust, mastery quietly settled in, not as a loud victory, but as a calm certainty. He was no longer trying to remember English. He was living it. Chapter 10, From Remembering to Becoming. Ethan didn't notice the change at first. That's how real transformation always happens. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply appears one quiet day, disguised as something ordinary. He was walking down the street, listening to people talk, when he realized he wasn't trying to remember anything. Words, ideas, meanings, everything just arrived. No effort, no panic, no mental searching. His mind felt light, clear, fast. And in that moment, Ethan finally understood the truth. Remembering was never the goal. Becoming was. For most of his life, Ethan thought memory was about holding information tightly, forcing it to stay, repeating things endlessly, blaming himself every time something slipped away. He believed forgetting meant he was weak, slow, or not smart enough. But now, standing at the end of this journey, he saw how wrong that belief had been. Memory was not a storage problem. It was a connection problem. And connection is built through meaning, emotion, use, and identity. Ethan didn't remember things because he tried harder. He remembered because his brain finally knew why it mattered. He thought back to the beginning. How frustrated he used to feel forgetting words, lessons, conversations, even important moments. He remembered sitting alone, staring at his notes, rereading the same lines again and again, wondering why nothing stayed. But what he didn't realize back then was that his brain was protecting him. It refused to store information that had no emotional weight, no personal relevance, no action attached to it. The brain is not lazy. It is efficient. And once Ethan stopped fighting it and started working with it, everything changed. Now, memory felt automatic. Not because he memorized more, but because he used more. He spoke. He wrote. He explained. He taught. He felt. He lived the information. And living information transforms it into instinct. This was the final step, moving from conscious remembering to unconscious mastery. The stage where knowledge no longer feels like knowledge, but like part of who you are. Ethan noticed it most when speaking English. He no longer translated. He no longer searched. Sentences formed themselves. Words came with emotion attached. Ideas connected naturally. His memory wasn't trying to recall vocabulary, it was expressing thought. And that's when it hit him. True memory is invisible. You don't feel it working. You don't notice it activating. It simply supports you in the background while you live your life. This is what mastery looks like. Not perfection, not speed, but effortless access. When you don't think, do I remember this? You just use it. When your brain stops asking for permission and starts acting from identity. Ethan wasn't someone who remembered English anymore. He was someone who used English. He wasn't someone trying to improve his memory. He was someone whose brain trusted itself. And trust is everything. He realized that forgetting never meant failure. Forgetting was feedback. A signal that something needed more meaning, more emotion, more use. Once he understood that, he stopped fearing forgetting. And once fear disappeared, memory strengthened naturally. The brain does not store information under pressure. It stores information under safety, relevance, and repetition with purpose. Ethan smiled as he thought about how many people were still blaming themselves for something that was never their fault. How many learners believed they had bad memory, when in reality they had the wrong system. Schools never taught how memory actually works. They taught repetition without meaning, memorization without emotion, learning without identity. No wonder people forget. No wonder learners feel stuck. But now Ethan knew better. And more importantly, you know better. If you are listening to this story, reading these words, reaching this final chapter, it means something inside you is ready to change. You are not here by accident. You are here because your mind is searching for a better way. And this is that way. So let this be the moment you stop saying, I forget easily. Replace it with, I remember what matters. Let this be the moment you stop blaming your brain. Replace it with, I know how my brain works. Let this be the moment you stop collecting information. Replace it with, I use what I learn. Because remembering everything is not about holding more. It's about becoming more. From today, don't ask, how can I remember this? Ask, how can I use this? How can I feel this? How can I connect this to who I am becoming? That question alone will change how your brain works. And if your goal is English fluency, confidence, clear thinking, and fast expression, remember this. Language lives through use, emotion, and identity. Not through silent memorization. Not through fear. Not through pressure. You don't need a better memory. You need a better method. And now you have it. If this story helped you understand your mind, if you finally see why forgetting was never your enemy, and if you're ready to remember faster, think clearer, and speak English naturally. Subscribe for more mindset-based English learning stories, like this video to support deep learning content. Comment memory if you're ready to upgrade your brain. Share this with someone who thinks they have bad memory, because forgetting is not weakness. It's a signal. And now you know how to listen